Hello and welcome everybody. The MD11, an amazing airplane we all love. So let's do the cockpit and FMS preparation together and then of course take off and climb to 10,000 feet. So sit back, relax and enjoy. And first make yourself familiar with the cockpit, where are all the switches, the overhead panel, the main panel, thrust levers, the seats and everything, and of course enjoy the view from the big windows which are famous for the MD11. Let's switch to the overhead panel. You see a lot of switches up there, that's true, but don't worry about those yet. We are just working with the normal operation and no emergency procedures yet. So at first we need to switch on the battery, there you go, and then the external power which is already connected to the airplane, and standby power to arm. Sometimes I'm a little struggling with the switches and the mouse, how it works. So see, the standby power is to arm now, and we start the APU. You see the flashing APU light, so that means the APU is starting. It takes a little while until it's actually on. Seatbelt signs, no smoking signs on. Yeah, well, you can argue if you really need them because you're in a cargo airplane, but it's just procedure, just switching them on. And just the lights for the panel and over the panel, I like it to have a little brighter during the daylight and nice and cozy during nights. The next is switch on the IRS, all three, turn off, and then the cargo fire test starts automatically. That's the noise you hear in the background. Don't worry about that, you will get an error message if something is wrong with it. Back to the main panel, you can switch on the other system displays. You have miscellaneous configuration, fuel, air, electronic, hydraulic, engine, nav display, consequences, and status. Just click through them and just check out how they look like and what you can actually see on them. Right now we have the electrical switched on to see if the APU is finally working, and when the AP power becomes available, select it to on and external power to off. So the airplane is now electrical supplied by the APU only. Okay, let's work with the FMS now. You see this little align IRS. Go to the init page, you see initialize IRS. Click next to it, so that means that the IRS gets the information needed to actually work. Now we enter the route, EGLL to EHAM, the short versions from London Heathrow to Amsterdam. We're not flying all the way to Amsterdam Schiphol today, but you need a full route. Well, it says not allowed. Don't worry, it is allowed. That's an issue with the PMDG. Unable to load flight plan. Don't worry, it is able to be loaded. Okay, of course every flight needs to have an alternate, so this is Echo Delta Delta Lima, which is Düsseldorf, just close to Amsterdam, so we should go there in case of a diversion. The best flight number out there will go 737, of course. Flight level, we just go up to 21,000 feet, or we call it flight level 210, so you enter this there, and then the cost next just at 30. We don't want to fly too fast, it's a short flight anyway, so nice and short. This is the weight init page. You go to the fuel and double check if you have enough fuel. Well, obviously the fuel tank hasn't been there yet, so just call them. We need a little more fuel. Just takes a couple of seconds, and there is quickly refueling 30.5 tons. That's more than enough for that short flight, but it's a simulator, so we can have a lot of fuel. Enter the block fuel there, enter the zero fuel weight you need, enter the takeoff CG and the zero fuel weight CG. Now back to the panel again, switch on VOR1 and VOR2, airport, data, so you can see those on the nav display. Well, we don't have the radio altimeter minimum now, so put it to 0, and let's go back to the FMS. We need a departure runway, today it's runway 27 right, with a Dover 5 Foxtrot, Delta Victor Romeo 5 Foxtrot SID, and then push insert, and the SID becomes available. See, if you scroll down you can see this. Enter a star and an ILS for Amsterdam as well. Of course we don't fly there, but you do this during the flight preparation. You enter all the departure and arrival routes and runways already, so you have a proper fuel calculation for the flight. You can see the routing now on the nav display. Switch through the pages to see everything's fine. Enter the transition altitude of 5,000 feet so that you're flying at flight levels above 5,000 feet. We plan to climb to flight level 210, so enter this into the autopilot already. As we don't have any restrictions, put on the heading bug towards runway heading 272. Later on we will put the V2 into the speed window. We don't have calculated that yet, so that's why we don't enter it yet. Outer brakes to RTO, of course. Once you have received the load sheet, you can do the takeoff performance calculation, which gives us full thrust today. Because it's a flight simulator, you can do that. Flaps 15, slope 0, wind 0, perfect weather condition, 15 degrees Celsius. And now he asks you to confirm the V speeds for V1, VR and V2. And once you've confirmed them, you put them into the speed window 168, put it in here so that the autopilot later on commands the correct speeds. The airplane still shows that the airplane doors are open, but as you can see, the doors are closed, so we can just ignore it. This seems to be a glitch or a bug, whatever you want to call it. So just ignore it, even if it says door open. So basically all is set, so we prepare the airplane now for engine start. Switch on the beacon. We need the APU bleed air to start the engines. That's essential, otherwise you cannot start the engines. Then you select the ignition A. Then the packs are being switched off automatically because you need all the air for the engine start and not for the air condition anymore. Now we go to the engine start switches. Engine 3 start. You can see the lights goes on in a second. There you go. And you can see the N2 starts to increase. And you see this tiny little blue line there. And once the N2 reaches this blue little line, you put in the fuel control switch to on. Then you can see the AGT rise in the N1 as well, because then you put in the fuel and the ignition does its thing. Then you just observe the engine spooling up, pretty much done automatically. Of course, if something goes wrong, you need to interact and do something. But surprise, surprise, today's in simulator, it just works fine. Once the engine has reached its proper values, you can see the engine 3 light goes off. So that means the engine starter cuts out and the engine stabilizes itself at idle. And you just repeat it for engine 1 as well. You can see I pulled the engine start switch already, the lights on and the fuel online about 15% in 2. You put in the fuel control switch to on and the ignition kicks in and the fuel flow. So you can see the engine values increasing. And the same here, once the idle values or almost the idle values have reached, the engine start switch light goes off. So that means the starter doesn't support the engine start anymore, and the rest is done automatically. And now let's start engine number 2. That's the sequence we did it all the time. We put on the engine number 3 first, then engine number 1, and the last, the tail engine number 2. Same here, you observe N2 reaching the fuel on line, put on the fuel control switch to on, engines firing up, the HT rises, N2, N1, everything rises, and once the correct values have reached, again the engine start switch light goes back to off and all 3 engines are running. Pretty simple, right? All 3 engines are running smoothly, so it's night time to put in the flaps to 15 and to arm the speed brake just in case. You see the flap lever is moving, and you can see on the primary flight display on the bottom left the slats and the flaps are moving and the speed brake is armed. Now hit the nav and prof switches once. You can see on the primary flight display that they are armed now, so that after takeoff they will be engaged automatically. Well, that's basically it. Now we are cleared for takeoff, switching all the landing lights. Me struggling again how it works properly on the flight simulator. See, turn off lights, high tendency lights are the strobe lights. It's called a little different here. So we are all set for takeoff. Now push the auto flight switch once, so that arms the auto thrust for takeoff. And now advance the thrust lever slowly until all engines spool up smoothly, and at a certain angle the outer thrust takes over and sets takeoff thrust automatically.
Thrust set. 80 knots. V1. Rotate.
Now gently pull on the yoke, 3 degrees per second until you're reaching about 10 degrees. Let the airplane lift off and then readjust the pitch, follow the flight director commands, and of course select the gear up. I'm pretty lazy today, so I'm switching on the autopilot quite early. You just hit the auto-flight switch once, and then you can see the small AP1 in the primary flight display, so that means autopilot 1 is active. Yeah, you can just saw I try to get rid of the climb restriction of flight level 60 at a specific point, and Heathrow has this, and we don't want to level off at flight level 60, so I try to get rid of it. But it didn't work the way I liked to, so let's try again. Of course, don't hit the delete, so you need to go to the active flight plan, delete there the flight level restriction, and then you can continuously climb to flight level 210. So as we are airborne, we don't need the auto brakes anymore and not the speed brakes anymore, so put it to off. Well, and if you look at the nav display, you can see TCAS off. Well, guess what happened? I forgot to switch on the transponder, so I will correct that right now. Of course, transponder code is 7474, the best ones out there. Now I'm struggling again how it actually works with the mouse and the view there to get to the right mode. But finally, I did it. As we continue to climb and accelerate, we need to retract the flaps. Flaps up, as you heard. You can see in the primary flight display on the bottom left, the flaps are moving from 15 to up. And now only the slats are extended, and now we're retracting the slats as well. You can see here, and once the slats are retracted, we have a so-called clean airplane, so no flaps and no gear. So that's a clean wing. Passing through transition altitude of 5,000 feet, but we don't have to switch to standard right now, because today we have standard day. QNH 2992 is basically standard, so we are flying not altitudes anymore, so from this point on it's all flight levels. Well, the autopilot is flying now. You can see it's following the route and the climb profile all the way to flight level 210, so you don't have to do much. It won't even level off at flight level 100, so as we continue to climb flight level 210, it will just lower the nose at flight level 100 to accelerate to our climb speed, because below flight level 100 we're supposed to maintain 250 knots. When passing 10,000 feet, you can see on the speed scale it's right now 250 knots. This little magenta circle will jump to the climb speed, and then lowering the nose, accelerating to the speed. And at 10,000 feet you switch off the landing lights, well, trying to at least. Me struggling how to do it correctly. There you go. And the runway turn-off lights, we don't need them anymore as well. And the seatbelt signs off as well. Well, that's it already. Passing 10,000 feet. I hope you enjoyed this short video. If you have any questions or feedback, just drop me a message on any social media or email. Thank you very much. Take care und auf Wiedersehen.